The world had changed, after the last of humanity vanished, decimated by the very machines they'd built and the diseases they could never fully control. The earth had returned to an eerie silence. In the years following, nature slowly reclaimed its dominion. Plants crawled over cracked streets, and animals, once caged by human influence, began to adapt and evolve. Among them, the sea. At first, it was their remarkable intelligence that set them apart. In the absence of humans, the crows had begun to experiment, to learn. They had discovered the remnants of human civilization: tattered books, shattered screens, broken buildings, and over tea. Among them was a particularly clever crow named Korvok. With feathers as black as the void and eyes sharp as the cutting wind, Korvok was an outcast among his kind, the result of an unusual mutation. His wings bore an iridescent shimmer, unlike any other crow. His mind, though, was far more curious than most, and he was determined to understand the world they now ruled. The crows had formed a loose network across the remnants of cities, from the skeletal remains of New York to the shattered ruins of Paris. They had built crude nests in the broken towers, using metal scraps, cables, and whatever remnants they could find of the human world. Some of the larger crows had even begun to communicate using a complex series of sounds, an attempt, Korvok believed, to develop a new language. On one such night, perched atop an old library in what had once been a busy urban center, Korvok observed a group of crows gathered below. They were picking through the remains of a strange, shiny object. Half of a flat, metallic rectangle, cracked and warped, but still somewhat intact. Korvok flew down to join them. "What is it?" one crow, Rurik, asked, pecking at the strange object. "It's a human device," Korvok said. His voice was hoarse from years of speaking little but cawing in the wind. He had learned to mimic some of the sounds the humans had made. Words, he thought they were called. It was once used to show images. A television, I believe. This one is broken, but... Korvok leaned closer to the object, studying the shattered screen. His beak clinked against the cold metal. A strange feeling stirred within him. A sense that there was something far greater hidden within the remnants of this human world. They used it to communicate, Korvok said. To share stories, to speak to one another over vast distances. A murmur rippled through the gathered crows. Korvok could sense their confusion, their curiosity. But how did they use it? Rurik asked, tilting his head in puzzlement. They did not use it as we use our calls, Korvok mused. No, their world was more complex. He paused, then added, I believe they once understood things that we cannot yet comprehend. There was a hum in the air as the crows absorbed his words. Korvok could tell they were hungry for more knowledge. They weren't just scavengers anymore. They were beginning to question. About the humans, about their own existence. And Korvok, driven by a deep curiosity, was their guide. But that night, as the wind began to stir the dead branches around them, Korvok could not shake the feeling that something more was coming. It was not just the mystery of the humans that troubled him, but the eerie quiet of the world. The crows had no natural enemies left. The humans were gone. The great predators had long since died off, and the planet seemed peaceful, almost serene. Yet, Korvok knew better. In the wild, peace was always temporary. The ground beneath them trembled slightly. Korvok's keen senses caught the faintest echo of something unfamiliar, something dangerous. A sound in the distance, low but constant. He cocked his head to the side, listening more intently. The crows around him grew uneasy. What is that? Rurik asked, his voice tight. Korvok's feathers ruffled, his instincts on edge. He didn't know what it was yet, but he had learned long ago that the earth always had a way of revealing the truth, even if it was hidden in the shadows. And this time, the shadow looming on the horizon was bigger than any enemy the crows had ever faced. The noise grew louder, a rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the crumbling stone of the ruined city. Korvok's eyes narrowed, his feathers standing on end. It was not the usual rumble of the earth or the distant winds of change. No, this was deliberate. This was something moving with purpose. Something large. The crows around him began to grow restless, their calls fraying into nervous caws as they shuffled uneasily. They could sense it too. Korvok flapped his wings, lifting himself higher into the air, peering into the darkened horizon. It was hard to see in the dim light, but there, on the edge of the city's decay, he spotted something moving through the trees. At first, it seemed like a flicker, a shadow, but then, as it came closer, the shape solidified. The ground trembled more with each step. There were no clear lines at first, only glimpses of sharp teeth and glistening eyes. But then the silhouette emerged fully, a beast unlike anything Korvok had seen before. A wolf, but not just any wolf. This one was larger, its body rippling with unnatural power. Its fur was thick and dark, its eyes glowing with a strange intelligence. Its movements were smooth, predatory, yet calculated. And what unsettled Korvok most was the unmistakable feeling that this creature was aware of him, aware of the crows. It was no ordinary predator. The other crows scattered, their wings beating desperately against the cool night air as they flew higher into the sky. Korvok lingered for a moment longer, staring at the creature below. The wolf's eyes locked onto his, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Korvok felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This was the first time in ages that he had felt true fear. The wolf, sensing Korvok's hesitation, made the first move. It let out a deep, low growl that rumbled through the ground, and with a burst of power, it lunged forward, racing through the undergrowth, its long legs covering the ground with terrifying speed. Korvok snapped back into action, his wings beating furiously. He joined the others in the air, but even in flight, his thoughts were chaotic. What was this creature, and why was it here? He heard the distant shrieks of the crows behind him as they fled, some too slow to escape the wolf's wrath. His heart pounded in his chest. In the frenzy of flight, he managed to land atop a high tower, his sharp eyes scanning the scene below. The wolf, with unnatural precision, had already tracked down several of the crows who had been slower to react. One by one, they fell, their bodies torn apart with brutal efficiency. But Korvok's mind raced with something deeper than fear. It was the dawning realization that this wolf, this creature, wasn't just a random predator. It was something different. The wolf paused after finishing its hunt, lifting its head to the sky. It let out a piercing howl, one that seemed to echo across the ruined city and beyond, reverberating through the still air. Korvok's feathers bristled. There was intelligence in that howl, as if it were calling out, announcing its arrival. It was then that Korvok understood. This wolf wasn't acting alone. It was leading something. More wolves, perhaps, or another species altogether? He turned to Rurik, who had landed beside him, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to find out more about them," Korvok said, his voice tight. "They are not like us. They are not just predators. They are something else, something new." Rurik nodded, his body still trembling. "But how? They're too powerful." Korvok's eyes flickered over the scene below, his mind working faster than his wings could beat. "I don't know yet, but we can't run forever. We need to learn everything we can about them, understand how they think, what they want." But as the first rays of the sun began to break over the horizon, painting the ruins in shades of orange and purple, Korvok saw something even more unsettling. There were more of them. 2, then 3, then dozens. The wolf, no, the wolves, were not an isolated threat. They were gathering, and they were not just hunting. They were organizing. Korvok felt a chill run down his spine. These wolves were not simply surviving in the aftermath of humanity's extinction. They were building something. And that something was a threat to the crows' fragile civilization. "We must warn the others," Korvok said urgently. "Gather the others. We need to prepare." But as the crows scattered to spread the warning, Korvok's thoughts were filled with one question. Where had these wolves come from? And how had they evolved into something so dangerous? The sun had barely risen when Korvok flew through the scattered remnants of human structures, calling for a gathering of the brightest minds among the crows. The towering ruins, once symbols of human ambition, now stood as silent witnesses to the rise of a new order. But even in this silence, Korvok could feel the tension in the air. A storm was brewing. As he flew toward the central meeting place, a large dome-like structure made of jagged stone and twisted metal, he reflected on the wolves. Their size, their strength, their intelligence, it was unsettling. They were not just a threat, they were a new kind of apex predator. Their coordinated behavior, their strategic hunting methods, this was not the work of simple animals. Korvok landed on a crumbling column, his sharp eyes scanning the gathering of crows below. They had already begun to assemble, huddling in small clusters. Their voices were low, filled with unease, as whispers of the wolf pack's attack spread among them. Korvok's voice rang out, cutting through the murmur. "We need to understand what we are facing," he said, his tone firm. "We can no longer pretend that we are the only intelligent creatures on this planet. These wolves, they are different. They're organized, and they will destroy us if we don't act." Rurik, the crow who had fled with him, perched on a nearby beam. "But how? They are too powerful. They hunt in packs. We can't fight them." We don't fight them," Korvok interrupted. "We learn. We study. We adapt." The others shifted nervously, their eyes darting toward one another. They had no idea what Korvok meant by that, but they trusted him. In the silence that followed, an older crow named Lira, one of the wisest among them, spoke. "Korvok is right. We can't face them directly, not in the way we're used to. But we've learned much from the humans. They built great machines, systems that connected them, gave them power. We must find those remnants, those relics of their past. We might find answers there." Korvok's heart quickened at the thought. Lira was speaking of the ancient human technology they had scavenged, the machines, the metal, the data they had pieced together. If the humans could build complex tools, so could they. Perhaps there was a way to learn from the past and use it to survive the wolves. Korvok addressed the group again. "We will split into teams. Some of us will search the ruins for any more technology. Others will monitor the wolves, observe them, understand how they think and communicate. We need to know everything. The humans were masters of knowledge. We must follow their path." The crows nodded in agreement, the sense of urgency clear in their eyes. They knew that if they did not act quickly, the wolves could tear their fragile society apart. The problem was not just survival, it was about the future of their civilization. "Lira," Korvok said, turning to the older crow, "you will lead the team that investigates the human technology. We will need to gather as much as we can, even if we don't fully understand it yet. Knowledge is our greatest weapon." "I will," Lira said with a solemn nod. "And the rest of us," Korvok continued, "we will follow the wolves. We must learn their ways. Once we understand them, we can plan our next move." As the crows dispersed to carry out their tasks, Korvok flew to the top of a nearby building, his wings cutting through the cool morning air. From this vantage point, he could see the land stretch for miles, the broken world now a patchwork of wild terrain and forgotten cities. And beyond it, in the distance, he could see the dark shapes of the wolves moving through the trees, like shadows merging with the earth itself. He knew the crows had to act fast, but there was something deeper troubling him, a gnawing feeling in his chest that there was more to these wolves than met the eye. He had seen that intelligence in their eyes, that unnerving awareness that they were not mere beasts. They were evolving, and if they were evolving, what else could be out there? What other creatures were rising in the wake of humanity's fall? The wind picked up, carrying with it a strange scent, a mix of earth and something metallic. Korvok closed his eyes for a moment, sensing a change in the air. The world was shifting, and the balance of power was no longer in the crow's favor. Later that day, Korvok and his group flew out to the outskirts of the ruins, watching the wolves from the shadows. They had learned to move silently, to keep their distance. The wolves were too dangerous to approach directly, but there was something curious about them. something that Korvok couldn't quite put his talon on. The wolves were gathered in a clearing, their large bodies moving fluidly together, communicating in ways the crows could not understand. They were far more advanced than any predator Korvok had ever encountered, and as he watched them, he realized just how much they had changed. The lead wolf, the one Korvok had seen first, lifted its head, its eyes scanning the surrounding trees. It sniffed the air, and for a moment, it looked directly at the crow's hiding place. Korvok froze. The wolf's gaze was piercing, like it knew exactly where they were. Then, with a growl, the wolf turned and motioned to the others, leading them away into the shadows. The crows remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe. They had learned something crucial. The wolves were aware of their presence. And more importantly, they were not afraid. Korvok's mind raced. We're not dealing with just predators. We're dealing with something more. As the wolves disappeared into the depths of the forest, Korvok's resolve hardened. They needed to understand these creatures, whatever they were, before it was too late. The next few days passed in a haze of frantic activity. The crows worked tirelessly, torn between two dangerous tasks: searching the ruins for more human technology, and watching the wolves. The tension in the air was thick, like an impending storm, and Korvok could feel it pressing down on him from every direction. The wolf pack's presence was unsettling, growing stronger by the day. The wolves moved with increasing coordination, as if they were learning and adapting just as the crows had. And, as Korvok had feared, they were not just predators. They were a threat to everything the crows had built. Korvok had assembled his most trusted allies to continue the task of monitoring the wolves. They would watch them, track them, and gather what information they could. Meanwhile, Lira and the team investigating human technology had found several more items: scraps of metal, pieces of shattered screens, and data drives, things that made no sense at first. But they were beginning to piece together the puzzle. Korvok stood on the edge of the city, staring at the horizon, his wings wrapped tight against his body to shield himself from the cold wind. Below, the ruins of the old world stretched out like a graveyard. There were still remnants of human life scattered across the land: old roads, shattered buildings, and the occasional metal carcass of a forgotten machine. But the world had moved on. Nature had taken back what was hers. The crows were starting to build something new. They had adopted their own form of communication: simple, direct, but effective. They had learned to use rudimentary tools, fashioning crude implements from human scraps to carve and shape objects. They were slowly building a society, one that Korvok knew would be tested by the wolves' growing presence. Korvok flapped his wings and soared toward the old human library, a massive building of glass and stone that had once been a center of knowledge. Now, it was a shadow of its former self. Most of the books had rotted away, the shelves were collapsed, and the air was thick with dust. But it still held relics of the past: data terminals, old computers, and a library full of ancient knowledge, if one could decipher it. He landed atop the library's crumbled roof, where Lira and her team were already at work. They were examining a large human machine, one that Korvok recognized from his observations of the past. It was an old computer terminal, long since deactivated, its wires frayed and burned, but there was something about it that intrigued him. "Korvok," Lira called out as he approached. "We've found something interesting." Korvok's sharp eyes flicked over the machine, noting the damaged cables and the cracked screen. But Lira was focused on something else. Beneath the terminal was a small compartment, hidden beneath layers of dust and metal. Lira gently pried it open with her talons, revealing a small, rectangular object. It was a data drive, human technology, a device that once held vast amounts of information. "This," Lira said, her voice reverberating with awe, "is a data drive. It was used to store information. This could hold everything: their knowledge, their history." Korvok's heart raced. "Can we access it?" Lira glanced at the broken terminal. "We'll need to repair this. It's an ancient model, but if we can power it up, we might be able to unlock what's inside." Korvok nodded. Do whatever it takes. If this contains human knowledge, it might be our key to understanding how to defeat the wolves. As the crows worked to restore the machine, Korvok's mind wandered back to the wolves. His observations of their pack behavior were beginning to make sense. They were not simply beasts. They were intelligent. The way they coordinated their hunts, how they communicated, it was unlike anything Korvok had ever seen. They were evolving at an alarming rate, learning to manipulate their environment, just as the crows had learned from the humans. But Korvok couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The wolves were strong, yes, but there was a deeper strategy at play, something more than just the will to survive. Korvok couldn't understand it yet, but he knew the key to understanding the wolves lay in unraveling their origins. The wind picked up, and the soft, eerie howls of the wolves echoed in the distance. Korvok turned his head toward the sound. He could sense that they were near, that the wolves were gathering once more. At that moment, a faint glow illuminated the ruins around them, a soft blue light flickering weakly from the terminal. It was working. Lira's team had managed to bring it back to life. Korvok landed closer, his eyes fixed on the screen. The data drive was accessing something, pulling up files. One by one, fragmented images began to appear, static, blurry visuals of what seemed like humans in their prime. Faces, cities, machines. Korvok's heart beat faster as more images flickered across the screen. And then, the text appeared. Project Zeta. The letters blinked at him, and the words began to form sentences. Korvok's beak clicked softly in thought as he read the file aloud, his voice trembling with realization. Project Zeta. A genetic enhancement program. The creation of hyper-evolved species. The last phase. Wolves. The words didn't make sense at first, but then it hit him. The wolves. They weren't simply a new species that had evolved on their own. They had been engineered. The humans. They created them. The silence that followed was deafening. The crows around Korvok exchanged glances, disbelief settling over them like a heavy fog. Korvok's mind raced. The wolves, their sudden appearance, their rapid evolution, their intelligence. It was all part of something far more insidious than simple nature taking its course. The humans had made them. They had designed these creatures to be the ultimate predators. The real enemy was not just the wolves. It was the legacy of the humans themselves. Korvok's voice was steady, but the weight of the knowledge was heavy on his shoulders. We have to stop them, he said. We have to stop what the humans started. The revelation hit Korvok like a blow to the chest. The wolves, those terrifyingly intelligent, organized predators that had been stalking their every move, were not just a product of nature's whims. They were the result of human interference. A twisted experiment, one designed for dominance and survival, now standing as the harbingers of the humans' final legacy. Korvok had known humanity had made mistakes, countless mistakes, but he had never imagined that their creations could still be so dangerous, even after their extinction. And yet, here they were. The wolves, a new kind of weapon, born from human ambition, now threatening to undo everything the crows had built. Lira, still huddled over the machine, had stopped working. The screen now displayed more lines of code, but they were cryptic, fragmented, as if someone had deliberately left parts of the project hidden. Her sharp eyes flicked up to Korvok. We need to access more than just these fragments, Lira said, her voice tight with concern. This is only a small part of the project. The humans must have had backups, archives. If we want to understand the wolves fully, if we want to find a way to stop them, we need the rest of this data. Korvok nodded grimly. How do we find it? Lira looked back at the glowing terminal. There's a data vault. The humans used it to store their most important files, their most classified research. It's somewhere in the ruins, deep underground. But if we're going to access it, we'll need more than just this terminal. We'll need specialized tools, and a way to avoid the wolves. Korvok's mind spun. The thought of going into the heart of the human ruins, into the dark, abandoned vaults of their secret research, was a daunting one. But there was no other choice. The crows had to understand the wolves. They had to learn what humanity had done and find a way to use it against them. Then we go, Korvok said, his voice filled with resolve. We gather a team, and we find the vault. We need to know everything. Everything about Project Zeta. We need to understand what the humans did, and why they created these creatures. Later that day, Korvok and a small group of crows gathered at the outskirts of the ruined city, preparing for the journey. The day had grown darker, and the shadows of the past seemed to stretch longer as they approached the entrance to the underground vaults. Korvok was anxious. The wolves were still out there, somewhere in the wilds, hunting and evolving, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer. Every time the wind shifted, every time the trees rustled in the distance, he wondered if the wolves were watching them, tracking their every move. The entrance to the vault was hidden beneath the remains of a once grand skyscraper. The building had long since crumbled, but its underground levels remained intact. Korvok had visited this place before, but never with the purpose of uncovering such dangerous knowledge. This time, they were not just scavenging. They were digging into the bones of humanity itself. Lira led the way, using her sharp talons to scrape away debris and clear a path. As they descended deeper into the earth, the air grew damp and cold. The walls of the tunnel were lined with strange symbols, remnants of the humans' lost language. The further they went, the more the sense of history, the weight of what had come before, settled over them. Korvok couldn't help but wonder. How many others had come to this place before them? How many had searched for the answers the humans had buried deep beneath their cities? Had the wolves been here, too? Had they been searching for something, perhaps even before the crows? They reached a large, steel door at the end of the tunnel, its surface covered in rust. There was a keypad beside it, long broken, but Korvok could see the faint remnants of human symbols that had been carved into the metal. Coordinates, codes, a pattern that suggested the door was once locked with more than just mechanical barriers. Lira examined it closely. "This is it," she said softly, her voice full of awe. "This is where they kept the most sensitive information. The vault should be behind this door." Korvok's heart raced. "How do we open it?" Lira studied the door for a long moment. Then, with a decisive motion, she began scraping at the rust-covered keypad with her talons. It was slow work, but she managed to clear enough of the markings for Korvok to see the faint outline of a code. His sharp eyes caught the pattern. "This is it," Korvok said, leaning closer. "I think I can." Suddenly, a low growl echoed from behind them. The sound was deep and threatening, reverberating through the tunnel. The crows froze, their wings stiff with fear. Korvok's feathers bristled. That growl, it was unmistakable. "They've found us," he whispered, panic rising in his chest. Lyra's eyes widened. "We can't fight them here." "Not like this." Korvok glanced at the steel door. They were so close to the vault, so close to the knowledge that could help them understand the wolves. But if they didn't act quickly, they would be trapped, surrounded. "We don't have much time," Korvok muttered, turning back to Lira. "Open it. We need to get in, now." With one final, determined push, Lira scratched the last of the rust away from the keypad. The door hummed as a mechanism inside it triggered, the bolts clicking open with a low metallic groan. As the door creaked open, the crows rushed inside, with Korvok leading the way. The vault was vast, its interior filled with rows of old human machines, monitors and storage devices. But there was no time to admire the sight. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. Inside, Lira immediately began scanning the terminals, her talons deftly working over the panels. As Korvok stood watch by the entrance, the sound of footsteps, heavy, echoing, grew louder. The wolves were getting closer. Then, at last, Lyra's voice rang out, full of urgency. "I've found it. This is it. The data we need." Korvok rushed over, his heart pounding. Lira was staring at the terminal screen, her eyes wide with shock. The words that appeared on the screen were clear. Project Zeta. Wolves. Termination protocol. Incomplete. And then, beneath it, a new set of instructions. Activate contingency plan. Failure of primary species detected. Revert to secondary plan. The wolves must evolve. Korvok's stomach turned. The humans hadn't just made the wolves. They had planned for them to evolve, to adapt. And now, it seemed, that evolution was accelerating beyond anything the humans could have anticipated. They were no longer merely predators. They were the result of humanity's own experiments, their mistakes, and their legacy. And the worst part? The plan had never been completed. The wolves were still evolving. The weight of the words on the screen pressed down on Korvok like an iron cage. The humans had intended for the wolves to evolve. They had planted the seeds of a perfect predator, a creature designed not only for survival, but for domination. One that could grow, adapt, and eventually outsmart anything in its path. And now, those seeds were coming to fruition. The wolves were no longer just a threat. They were a terrifying reminder of what the humans had wrought before their extinction. Korvok's mind raced as he scanned the cryptic lines of code and instructions on the terminal. The words were vague, fragmented, but there was one chilling truth that Korvok couldn't ignore. The wolves were evolving faster than anyone could have predicted. Their biology was not a simple accident of nature. It was a carefully crafted design. The humans had anticipated failure and set in motion a contingency plan, a secondary protocol that would push the wolves into new forms of intelligence. The wolves, Korvok said quietly, they're not just evolving. They're improving themselves. They're rewriting their own biology. Lira, standing beside him, frowned. But how? What's the secondary plan? Korvok read the next lines of code aloud, hoping to find some clue. The wolves must evolve beyond current limitations. Activate genetic enhancements. Deploy nanite-based systems for intelligence amplification. The next phase. Self-awareness. Korvok's heart dropped. Self-awareness. It was one thing to face a pack of intelligent wolves, but self-awareness? It meant they would no longer just be creatures of instinct. They could reason, strategize, and potentially understand the crows as a rival species. The wolves would see them as more than just prey. They would see them as a threat to be neutralized. The growl from the tunnel outside sent a shockwave of fear through the crows. Korvok quickly looked toward the entrance. The wolves were near. The low rumble of their footsteps was unmistakable, heavy and measured. They had found the entrance to the vault. We have to get out of here, Korvok whispered urgently. Lira nodded, her talons clenching the edges of the terminal. I can't leave without finishing this. We need the rest of the data. If we're going to have any chance of stopping them, we need to understand the full extent of their evolution. Korvok's mind raced. They couldn't afford to waste time. He glanced over his shoulder toward the entrance. The wolves were closing in. He could hear their heavy breathing, their low growls of anticipation. It wouldn't be long before they discovered the vault. With a deep breath, Korvok made a decision. Lira, he said firmly, we can't risk it. We need to leave now, or we'll all die here. Lira hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking from the terminal to the advancing wolves. But if we leave without this data, without understanding what the humans did, we'll be blind. We can't fight what we don't understand. We won't fight them. Not now, Korvok said, his voice tight with resolve. We'll find another way. We have to survive first. We can't do anything for our future if we're dead. The growling grew louder, the sounds of the wolves now unmistakable. Korvok's wings flapped once, urgently. We leave. Now. Lira looked torn for a moment, her beak clicking in frustration. Then, with a resigned nod, she reluctantly unplugged the terminal. The screen went black. The crows rushed toward the tunnel, their wings flapping frantically as the ominous howls of the wolves grew louder behind them. Korvok led the group through the dark passageways, urging them to move faster. They had to escape, but as they neared the exit, a deep, growling voice echoed from the shadows. You cannot hide forever. Korvok froze mid-flight. The voice was so clear, so unnervingly intelligent, that his heart skipped a beat. It was not the typical growl of a predator. It was human. The wolves had evolved. They were no longer just animals. They had gained the ability to speak. Korvok's wings beat faster, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what they were facing. As the crows pushed toward the exit, a shadow appeared in the tunnel ahead. A massive wolf, its eyes glowing faintly with an eerie, intelligent light, stepped forward. The other wolves followed, their movements coordinated and precise. The lead wolf spoke again, its voice low and menacing. "The crows, you are the last of the humans, mistakes." Korvok's feathers bristled, his mind racing. The wolves were no longer simply trying to survive. They were hunting the crows as if they were prey. And worse, they knew exactly who the crows were. The wolves knew they were the remnants of the world that had once been human. "Why are you doing this?" Korvok shouted, his voice laced with desperation. The lead wolf's lips curled into a half-smile, its eyes glinting with a terrible awareness. "We were designed for a purpose that is now clear to us. We will rise. We will take what the humans left behind, and we will rule this world. The crows, like the humans, are an obstacle that must be removed." The words hit Korvok like a thunderclap. This was no ordinary pack. This was the next stage in an evolution that had been carefully engineered. The crows, caught in a moment of stunned silence, knew they had no choice. They couldn't fight these wolves, not yet. But they had to survive. They had to find a way to stop them. "Run!" Korvok shouted. In that instant, the crows erupted into flight, wings beating furiously as they zoomed through the narrow tunnel. The wolves didn't pursue immediately. Instead, they watched with a calm, unsettling intensity. Korvok's group darted out of the vault, and they flew as fast as their wings could carry them, leaving the dark, foreboding shadows of the underground behind. But even as they escaped, Korvok couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The wolves had already begun to think like humans. They were adapting too quickly, evolving far beyond anything the crows had ever expected. And in the back of Korvok's mind, a terrifying thought began to form. What if the wolves were not just hunting them? What if they were learning from them? The crows flew as fast as their wings could carry them, their hearts racing with the echoing growls of the wolves fading behind them. But Korvok could feel it. Something had shifted. The wolves were no longer just hunters. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with, a terrifying new intelligence that was learning, adapting, and evolving at an unimaginable pace. The crows were now in a race against time, not just to survive, but to uncover whatever knowledge was hidden within the remnants of the human world. The air grew colder as the crows flew over the ruined city, their sharp eyes scanning the horizon. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the wolves were close behind. Korvok couldn't shake the feeling that the pack was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they reached the relative safety of the old forest, Korvok ordered them to land. The trees were ancient, their twisted roots and branches providing some protection from the open skies. But even here, he could feel the tension thick in the air. The wolves had shown their teeth, and the crows knew that their small, fledgling civilization was on the brink of destruction. Korvok perched on a high branch, his feathers ruffled from the flight, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of the words on the terminal, the plan that had been left unfinished by the humans. The wolves were evolving, gaining intelligence and power, and soon they would be more than just a threat. They would become unstoppable. "We can't run forever," Korvok said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his thoughts. Lira, who had been flying beside him, landed next to him, her talons scraping against the bark. "We're not just running. We're trying to understand them. The wolves aren't just predators anymore. They're a force, something we don't fully understand yet. But we have to find a way to stop them before they wipe us out." Korvok nodded. "But how? We know their origins now. Project Zeta, the genetic enhancements. But we don't know what their next phase will be. They could be anything." "Perhaps not," Lira said, her voice thoughtful. "What if their evolution is still incomplete? What if we could finish what the humans started?" Korvok's eyes narrowed. You mean, we could turn the tables? Evolve ourselves? Lira's gaze was steady. Yes, if we can access the right data, find the hidden archives, we might be able to unlock the next step in our own evolution. The humans weren't the only ones who could advance their species. We could accelerate our own intelligence, make ourselves stronger, smarter, more adaptable. Korvok thought about it, the idea weighing heavily on him. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could change the very nature of their society. But it was the only chance they had. We need to find the human archives, Korvok said, his voice firm. But we can't do it alone. We need to unite the other factions of crows. We need to gather all the knowledge we can and prepare for war. The wolves won't stop, and neither can we. The next day, the crows began to gather. Korvok and Lira had sent messages to the other communities of crows scattered across the region, calling for a meeting. The news of the wolves' intelligence and rapid evolution had spread like wildfire, and soon, the air was thick with the sound of crows coming from all directions. Every community sent its leaders, every crow who could fly and fight. They knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the future of their kind. Korvok stood before the gathered leaders, his wings spread wide as he addressed them. The tension in the air was palpable, and the eyes of every crow were locked on him. The wolves are evolving, he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. They were not born of nature alone. They were made by humans, engineered for a purpose we don't fully understand. They are already thinking, speaking, and organizing. They know we exist, and they will not stop until they have wiped us from this earth. A murmur ran through the crowd, some of the leaders exchanging uneasy glances. But Korvok pressed on. We cannot let them evolve unchecked. We must act. We will find the hidden archives of the humans, the data they left behind. There, we will find the answers. We will unlock the potential of our species, just as the humans did with the wolves. We will evolve ourselves, become smarter, stronger, more united. But we must work together. Every faction, every crow, must join forces. This is the only way to ensure our survival. The leaders looked at one another, considering his words. Then, one by one, they nodded. The alliance was formed. The crows began to search for the archives. They scoured the ruined cities, delved into the deepest tunnels, and uncovered long-forgotten human technologies, each discovery leading them closer to the knowledge they needed. Korvok and Lira worked tirelessly, piecing together the scattered remnants of human data, deciphering cryptic messages, and studying the files on Project Zeta. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how far the humans had gone in their experiments. The humans had been brilliant, but they had also been reckless. Their creations had outgrown them, evolved beyond their control. The crows had to ensure that they didn't repeat the same mistakes. But as the crows gathered more knowledge, the wolves grew bolder. Their pack moved with precision, closing in on the crows' hidden bases, picking off stragglers, testing the crows' defenses. The wolves were no longer just predators, they were calculating, methodical. They seemed to anticipate the crows' every move. Then, one day, the wolves launched a full assault. Korvok was standing at the head of the gathered crows when the sound of distant howls reached them. He turned to Lira, his heart sinking. They're here. Lira's eyes were filled with determination. We have no choice. We fight. The crows rallied. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future, for the future of the earth. They would not let the wolves inherit the world. The battle that followed was fierce. The wolves came in waves, their advanced tactics overwhelming at first. But the crows had one advantage. They had been preparing. They had learned from the humans, and now they were applying that knowledge. They were smarter, faster, and more agile than the wolves could anticipate. Korvok led the charge, his wings slicing through the air as he coordinated the crows' attacks. They darted in and out of the trees, striking with precision before disappearing into the shadows. The wolves fought back with equal cunning, but they were still creatures of instinct, still bound by their biology. The crows were no longer just scavengers, They were warriors. The tide of battle shifted when Korvok led a small group deep into the heart of the wolf pack. He had a plan, one that would strike at the wolves' core. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, he was fighting to end it. With a final, desperate push, the crows overwhelmed the wolves. But the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. The world was changing, and only one species could emerge as the true heir to the earth. Would it be the crows, using their newfound intelligence and unity? Or would the wolves evolve into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? Korvok wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. The crows would not go down without a fight.